There's a particular kind of morning that many women know well. The kind where your eyes open before the alarm, not because you've had enough sleep, but because your mind has already begun negotiating the day ahead, or your toddler needs breakfast at 5 a.m. You lie still for a moment, if you can, staring at the ceiling, and the room is quiet, but inside your head, it's quite the opposite. You're replaying yesterday's conversation, adjusting the tone of something you said, anticipating a question that might come later, at work, at home, somewhere in between. Before your feet touch the floor, your mind has already opened Outlook and planned the rest of your day. You reach for your phone, almost automatically, and the glow of screen confirms what your nervous system expects to see. 3 emails, all marked urgent, a calendar reshuffle that will change your afternoon, and a reminder that you agreed to moderate an internal panel discussion today because someone said we really need a strong female voice on this one. Of course they do. And of course you agreed because you're capable, you're reliable, and because at some point in your life you became the woman who can handle it all. And once you become that woman, the requests don't slow down. But the day you are preparing for is never just about one thing. It's professional and personal, visible and invisible. There are meetings to attend, children to coordinate, bento lunchboxes to prepare, PE kits to assemble, parents to check on, partners to support, friends to respond to, teams to guide, and bosses to please. Expectations must be met. There are atmospheres you need to regulate with your presence and emotions to soften. Outcomes you must protect. You're not simply managing tasks. You're managing ecosystems and you haven't even left your bed yet. With the International Women's Day approaching, I wanted to record something slightly different today. Perhaps more honest, something more personal, and something that recognizes not only what women achieve, but what we carry. Welcome to the Escalation Podcast. I'm your host, Editor, and today, this episode is dedicated to all women. To the women sitting in high-stakes boardrooms where every word carries weight. To the women building businesses while managing lives behind the scenes. To the women raising children, supporting partners, caring for parents, and holding families together with unbelievable strength. To all the women starting over in new cities, new careers, new chapters they never planned to open but stepped into anyway. To all the women who endure pressure, who carry responsibility daily with grace and ease. And to the women who are praised for being strong, not always because they choose to be, but because circumstances left them no alternative. Before I ever negotiated cross-border international trading agreements for a Tier 1 investment bank in the city of London, I grew up in Wrocław, Poland, watching the women around me, my grandmothers, my mother, my older sister, take on the world in the ways available to them. They were resilient long before I learned that resilience became a leadership quality. They carried responsibility without hesitation, and they worked without applause or any expectation of promotion or approval. At the same time, I grew up in a society that had very clear ideas about what women were meant to become. Homemakers, wives, mothers. There was a script, and that script felt very narrow to me at the time. Stepping outside that script did not remove pressure. It simply changed its shape for me. And whatever your arena is, corporate, finance, entrepreneurship, education, healthcare, creative work, or perhaps invisible labor of family life, you know something about the shape of that pressure. You know what it feels like to calibrate yourself, to be aware of the tone and egos when you walk into the room, and how to anticipate reactions. You know how to measure how much of yourself you can show in any given situation, to strive not only to succeed, but to succeed correctly. Not too loud, not too quiet, not too ambitious, and never too much. In the 80s, a term began circulating in psychology called Superwoman syndrome. It described women who felt compelled to excel across every visible domain of their lives at once. Career, family, relationships. It is the quiet expectation we impose on ourselves as women that we can hold it all, and we can hold it elegantly. Decades later, this phrase still lingers, but in high-performance corporate environments, the myth has evolved into something even more refined. It looks more precise than in the 80s. It looks like walking into a meeting having already anticipated every objection. It looks like delivering your argument with clarity while simultaneously monitoring the temperature of the room. It's you being sharp enough to command respect and measured enough to avoid resistance. You learn how to land your points in a way that moves the discussion forward without triggering unnecessary friction. You refine your tone, you edit your language in real time, you sense when to press and when to soften. Over time, all this becomes instinctive, but it does feel like hard work. Research has consistently shown that women in leadership roles experience closer observation, tighter behavioral expectations, and longer memory attached to mistakes. Within that environment, your response becomes logical. So what do? You carry more responsibility than strictly necessary. You take ownership of problems that were never formally yours to solve. You prepare beyond what is required. Because where credibility compounds slowly and doubt can show up quickly, excellence feels like a protective blanket. Over time, this way of operating becomes instinctive and people see the outcome. They see your competence, reliability, someone who handles it all, but they rarely see the cost of sustaining that high standard every single day. There's a paradox tagged beneath all of this that doesn't feel abstract once you've lived it. Study after study has shown that women often report higher levels of imposter feelings, even in environments where their performance ratings match or exceed those of their male peers. On paper, the competence is undeniable. In metrics, the output stands out, and yet internally, there is this persistent sense of self-doubt. Part of this tension comes from lived experience and not imagination. We see patterns in meetings that repeat themselves. Men are interrupted less frequently, period. There is actual science behind it. Women's contributions are more likely to be revisited through their lens of tone and likability. Where a man's directness might be interpreted as leadership, a woman's directness can sometimes be labeled as aggression. We all notice this. We may not comment on it, but we notice. And so our adaptation becomes, over time, increasingly clever. We double-check decks before they leave our desks. We anticipate questions behind the questions and prepare the answers before they're even asked. When a project succeeds, we credit the team. When something goes off track, we absorb responsibility almost reflexively. There's a piece of data that illustrates this dynamic powerfully, even outside boardrooms. You've probably heard of it before. Harvard Business Review famously reported that men will often apply for a job when they believe they can meet around 60% of their qualifications, while women tend to wait until they feel they meet every single one. That's not commentary on ability. It's an expression of how risk and self-judgment are internalized differently for us women. Let's talk about speaking up. There are certain rooms where the stakes feel amplified. Committee meetings, negotiation calls, boardroom presentations, ad hoc calls, promotion and compensation discussions where value needs to be translated into numbers. There is that subtle but persistent dynamic at play. Research into assertiveness has shown something uncomfortable but consistent. Behaviors that are rewarded in men can be labeled as socially unacceptable in women. Assertiveness in a man can be seen as leadership. In a woman, it can be labeled as aggression or dominance. Women who express strong opinions are considered more likely than men to be described as intimidating or bossy, even when their underlying competence is equivalent. You do not need a research paper to tell you this. You felt the way your own phrasing shifts in real time, how you soften a point or frame it collaboratively, not because you lack conviction, but because you understand the political temperature of the room. You open with context rather than declaration. You allow space around your certainty so it lands without resistance. You reframe conviction as contribution rather than control. There is an art to speaking in rooms where your authority is still being calibrated. There is a precision to knowing when to press, when to pause, when to let someone else restate your point so it carries differently. This isn't about diminishing your position, or at least not at first. It's more about navigating a challenging environment that still, in today's day and age, interprets strength differently depending on gender it comes from. Some research even suggests that the backlash against assertive behavior is less about capacity and more about expectations. Women learn over time to adjust their approach to avoid negative reactions. It feels like this is often expected of us, and it is a strain. Cognitive effort that is required to keep up with this performance accumulates over time, and it can be draining. So when people say to you, wow, you handled yourself so well, they're often admiring the result of work they never saw you do. But what happens when you stop adjusting? When you stop translating your expressions to fit the room? When you simply speak? What happens then is not a failure of strategy. It's a confrontation with a double standard. And in that confrontation, you begin to see the shape of the room more clearly. Not just how you fit into it, but how it has shaped the way you've learned to speak and how it made you become. In corporate life, visibility is our currency of advancement. You've all heard it before. You must be seen to progress. Your contributions must be recognized, your name circulated in rooms you aren't even in yet, your presence registered before opportunities arrive. Visibility creates opportunity and exposure. It's a delicate balance to strike, though, for us women. Too little and you're overlooked. Too much and you're scrutinized. Many women learn, almost unconsciously, how to operate within that narrow band. Be visible enough to be considered and measured enough to avoid triggering resistance. It's not something that makes the headlines, but it shapes your everyday decisions to ensure you don't disturb the balance of expectations. If you're one of few or the only woman in a workplace or working on a specific project or in a particular space, the dynamic intensifies. You know that your presence carries symbolic weight, not only on your task, but of female representation itself. Your success becomes more than a personal achievement. It becomes evidence, a signpost of what is possible, and your mistakes, however small, can feel amplified beyond proportion. Alongside your formal responsibilities, there can also be unspoken expectation that you will be a mentor. You will uplift, advocate, smooth tensions, translate cultures, all the things that make organizations function but rarely appear in promotion metrics. This is not just performance pressure, it's representational pressure. It asks you to be both individual and example, professional and symbol. That duality adds weight that does not appear in your job description, but we all carry nonetheless. When this pattern goes on long enough, it's easy to tell yourself it's just ambition. That's the relentless preparation and mental extra work that I have to put in, and they are simply part of being high achieving. Ambition certainly matters. Standards matter. Excellence requires intention, but beneath it all, there is fear. It shows up as reluctance to be replaceable, a deep aversion to disappointing those who rely on you, a concern about falling short in more than one domain at once. And for us women in high-performing roles, fear shows up wearing many different hats. It presents itself as discipline. It looks like late-night revisions and early morning responses. It sounds like you have it all in hand. Fear in these spaces dresses well. It blends seamlessly into excellence. And sometimes the internal dialogue, the one that you barely admit you have with yourself, sounds remarkably simple. I cannot afford to slip. That belief can propel extraordinary performance. It can also create a quiet cost. The slow shrinking space in which you allow yourself to be nothing other than capable, reliable, and composed. Now, there are no 5-step frameworks waiting at the end of this conversation. No prescriptions for balance packaged neatly into morning routines. The shift I'm inviting is smaller and more significant at the same time. It is the shift from assumption to awareness. To see that overfunctioning is often adaptation rather than personality trait. that exhaustion is not weakness, it's information, that you're not failing at balancing it all. You're navigating layered expectations that operate simultaneously and often invisibly. And now consider this. For most of recorded history, women were not even recognized as full citizens in many parts of the world. In the United States, women did not have the constitutional right to vote until 1920. And even then, discriminatory practices meant that it took decades for that right to be realized fully for all women. In many nations, women only gained the right to vote later in the 20th century. Access to education and equal opportunity is in itself a relatively recent chapter. Even where legal barriers have fallen, access to information, technology, capital, and networks has been uneven. Rates of violence, legal discrimination, and cultural exclusion have shaped entire generations. In economic life, representation is still far from equal. Women make up roughly 43% of the global workforce, yet hold just about 30% of leadership roles. In the world's largest corporations, only around 1 in 10 CEOs are women. And in the most powerful list, like the Fortune 500, that proportion has barely budged in recent years. Globally, only around 6% of CEOs and fewer than 9% of board chairs are women. These numbers do not exist in a vacuum. They are traces of centuries during which women fought, sometimes invisibly, sometimes loudly, for fundamental rights. The right to vote, the right to be educated, the right to own property, the right to leave home without permission, the right to work, the right to speak. International Women's Day frequently celebrates resilience, strength, and achievement, and all of that deserves recognition. But what I want to offer is another layer to that list of celebrations. Acknowledgement of cognitive load, the invisible negotiation, the emotional precision, the constant recalibration that happens daily and rarely receives any applause. So to all the women in high-stakes rooms, to the women holding teams together, to all the women carrying households, families, ambitions, responsibilities, you are never too much. You're worthy because you are, and you're enough just as you are. Happy International Women's Day, everyone. Until next time.